Americans hear the words national divorce, something in our DNA tells us to start thinking binarily. We take two floating crusts and we ask, how can they sustain? Where is their currency coming from? How do they divide the debt? Where's the military? Two floating crusts. Binary thinking. And I do think it's this kind of thinking that's led to why secession movements have failed to launch throughout the United States of America. This is a huge element. Other elements include the fact that Americans may not realize that they are their own floating countries that pay to be a part of the American Union. But I digress. I am just a former political science student from the nation's capital. And I've got news for Americans. You've got to start thinking about secession models now more than ever. National divorce. You need to start breaking spells about national divorce, breaking through all the misconceptions about national divorce, because you've got a diagnosis on your hands. You have an expired union. And so what is a national divorce? What does it seek to do? This is what questions you need to answer now. And it may start with rebranding national divorce as a national realignment of states, because that actually points to what you need now more than ever. A national divorce would be in the name of forming new economic wholes and establishing new unions because of the grim reality no one wants to confront. And I'll say it again, the American Union has actually expired. As a result, America cusps on political capture. That's America's biggest threat. There is an authoritarian class that has come in the name of democracy, and they flooded the census to impact the Electoral College as political strategy, and it's been efficient. You have an expired union problem. This is a recipe for political permanence. This is a recipe for how a constitutional republic becomes a constitutional democracy. The recourse for this is not playing political theater or making politics into a gladiator sport. You need newly formed economic wholes, newly established unions, at which point you shouldn't shrink away from the idea. If you look at a world map, so many countries exist because at some point in time, social organisms needed to divide. In history, countries have sought secession movements, but none has seen the precedents quite like America is seeing today. America sits on the cusp of something we can't understand fully, nor can we fathom fully, if that makes sense. Our precedents for a national realignment of states is jarring. So what is it? It's an overarching agenda that's taught Americans to defend that since this nation was stolen, the resolution is handing the country over to an elite class with political permanence interests. It's not to give the country back to its owners. It's to right the wrongs of colonization with globalization. Colonization and globalization are the same monster. Today, one just has a bigger hammer as it masquerades as the arbiter of love, tolerance, equality, and democracy. So, how did we get here? It took America more than 200 years to lose consensus on what a constitution should restrain and where the government's natural station should be. And if I'm being honest, those are the two most important things a social organism needs to have. When you don't have it, this loss of consensus creates a vacuum. And so far, this vacuum is what a class seeking political permanence has used to insert their agenda inside of. So, where's the proof? This is a weighted claim. I'll tell you something, you're standing in the proof, because symptoms that this has already occurred and is occurring is a flooding census, the inability to defend a border, as well as the blurred lines of citizenship. You're standing in the proof. These are the symptoms of an expired union. There is no denying this as a diagnosis for America, because for a vacuum to exist and these symptoms to occur, an expired union had to come first. If we tie this up, since the problem is a vacuum, the question becomes, should the vacuum be closed? The answer is yes. What barriers prevent that from happening? The answer is an overgrown census. So we end up where we began, where even if you stand opposed to the idea of a national divorce or a national realignment of states, the truth defends itself by keeping you inside of a circular revelation that screams that America is a population of 360 million that has become so large and so arrested by her weight and scale. She can't escape the tyrant. So she has to scale down in the 21st century. This responsibility will need to happen again in the 31st, 41st, and 51st century. Folks, we are supposed to cyclically and perpetually scale down. And I do believe we are the unlucky generation that must scale down to stay ahead of political capture, to reinvigorate our systems and processes that we've lost to time and corruption. So each economic whole will inherit the constitutions and founding documents already established, or else a constitutional republic becomes a constitutional democracy, where in the paradigm of that democracy, the census will continue to be flooded to directly impact the Electoral College. You're looking at your First and Second Amendments being lost forever. The courts absolutely will be packed. The age to vote lowered, the lines of citizenship blurred, the loss of nationhood imminent. The state's role in your life will grow because within a democracy, consensus equals truth. Understand this together. In democracy, consensus equals truth. The state decides what the truth is, meaning the citizen will outsource truth to the state. Within a constitutional democracy, this is a package deal. The Constitution's restraints are amended not to restrain government the way we know the government is restrained now. The Constitution will restrain the citizen, and the citizen will comply because the citizen trades liberty for safety in a constitutional democracy. That's what's at stake. So before we talk secession models, let's break one more spell about what prevented Americans from realizing the agenda afoot. It all boils down to political strategy. By observation, a uniparty has formed that despite their diverse political vehicles and ideologies, they all incrementally, mysteriously, magically inch America towards a constitutional democracy. Black, brown, white representatives from every walk of life, for example, all inch the people they're supposed to represent towards the same gate. What this does expose is that Democratic, Republican, and independent vehicles are leading to the same destination. Americans are taking different vehicles to arrive. I have studied with former political scientists and strategists in training, future politicians in the making. There was a message in a bottle that I would send Americans. It's that an agenda of the scale has worked for only two reasons. Understand, you created a vacuum knowingly or not because you lost the most important consensus on the constitutional restraints a social organism should have, while also Americans are just really easy to divide because they have no naturally forming unity projects. This means that your diversity is beautiful, but it's easily exploited, which makes it lethal. Most Americans know they are divided, but do they know why they're divided? From a political science perspective, in order to usher a census of over 360 million people into political capture, you have to inflame racial tensions. You have to divide by sex. You have to frame one class as the architects of all suffering. It's evil, but it's strategy. So I'm exposing it to you right now. Over 360 million people are divided on purpose by politicians and a propaganda machine because what naturally forms from the division are two very important elements. The elements are a class that consents to the tyrant and the class that resists the tyrant. Together, they are powerful. Do you know why? The answer will shock you, but the truth has no friends. Keeping Americans divided creates division. Division creates resistance. Resistance produces energy. Energy is power, and power is the ability to do work, political work. So, how is a census of 360 million ushered into the same future? Just keep them together long enough to exploit the fact that so long as they stay together, they are the power you need to further your agenda. Here's what Americans should know about tyrants. They're morally bankrupt, but they're not stupid. Tyrants plan agendas ahead to then work backwards to bring the general public up to those plans, to then make the general public do the work for those plans. If the public does the work, the public believes the plan was their idea. The American population builds themselves into a constitutional democracy this way. Whether they resist or consent, with this formula, they are the generator, the battery, the power source. That's the shocking, jarring truth. This does point to a tragic skeleton in America's closet. The overarching strategy to bring America to where she is today included making Black and brown communities slave for an overarching agenda. The pale communities fought and defended an overarching agenda. Other interest groups, domestic and foreign, financed, paid for an overarching agenda that's coming into fruition in our lifetimes. Nothing is by mistake. If the precedence for a national divorce or national realignment of states isn't obvious by now, it's that so long as the American population remains as large as it is, so long as you remain in an expired union creating a vacuum, you are the power source to this agenda. So to thwart the agenda, close the vacuum. In the 21st century, the 31st and 41st century, your grandchildren's children will have the same responsibility. You have to perpetually and cyclically scale down to thwart agendas. Since you are the power source, that's how you cut the power. You're not throwing a president at this problem. You can't. You have an expired union. Every ounce of energy has to be poured into making an appeal to the Creator and calling for an exodus. You need the brightest secessionists and constitutionalists who understand how systems, a military, and debt can be divided, and what territories have the most federal land, and what can become of airports. You're the generation that has to rise to this occasion now. The question is, will you? The general voter should not expect to walk into a voting booth every 4 years to vote their way out of an expired union's way. I'll tell you that. If that's the case, they'll be outpaced by a growing census and corruption. So, without further ado, we can talk secession models. Now that we know why economic wholes have to form, they must form, there are models to help conceptualize what becoming sovereign economic wholes look like. No one understands why states should use this hour to identify the economic engine from the whole until they put their eyes on maps of comparative population figures and GDP profiles comparative to other nations. This way, everyone understands that states are capable of sustaining themselves, as well as the scope and scale of an enterprise of this size. I do hope these models begin to break preconceptions and misconceptions about national divorce or national realignment of states. Americans have been asking for solutions in a world where no one knows what to do. They only react. We are buried beneath hyperstimulation. We are drowning in social conflicts. Your girl brought it to you first. I have your diagnosis, your prescription, and your recourse. Black, brown, and white Americans have been misled, deceived. They should unite to divide the union. They have to match the tyrant's energy like their futures have already been taken from them. A national realignment of states deserves all of your blood, sweat, tears, and attention, not political theater. This is not a call for war. This is a call for scaling down in the name of curing cultural malaise, civil unrest, and avoiding a humanitarian crisis. We have got to sever the jurisdiction of tyrants with God complexes. A national realignment of states is how you stay ahead of political capture. America, you have an expired union. You're standing in the proof. If you'd like secession model, if you'd like to see how you can scale down, stay tuned. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.